Hello and welcome back to the Ideal Nutrition Podcast. Today we're doing an episode for athletes, coaches and other dietitians listening specifically on nutrition for double training days. So just reiterating who this is kind of tailored to, but mostly those doing 2 longer and more intense training sessions within the same day. So endurance athlete, CrossFit athletes, team sports, or anyone who actually trains hard twice in a day. Less so people who do something like 1 strength session and 1 walk in a day.
Love that. Love the clarification because, yeah, I make a post on double training days and like I'll get comments from people who like just don't train hard and they're like, they'll make a comment and they're like, this doesn't apply to me. And I'm like, so fair. It doesn't. It doesn't apply to you. You're right. But yeah, I agree. So this is for people who train hard, train long. There's a few things we can do to kind of optimize things for improving performance in both sessions and also recovering well for the next one. So we are going to go through quite a few things. We're going to start by talking about refueling. So the first place we're going to start is glycogen, which is arguably our best fuel source for activity above a certain intensity. And if you're training twice per day and they're long sessions, and even more so if you're hitting the same muscle groups twice, even if that is lifting and then running, for example, or if you're running twice or whatever it is, there is a strong argument for replenishing glycogen stores as quickly as you can. So you have more glycogen going into the second session, you can perform better in the second session, and then potentially that better stimulus can lead to better adaptation over time. Directly post-exercise, the body is more sensitive to converting incoming carbs into glycogen. And we can take further advantage of that by having really easy to digest simple carbohydrates. It's hard to give specific guidance here because it really does depend on your overall goals. And that's a common theme we're going to talk about, being like, this thing matters, but total intake does matter more. So I would say something that is a good goal is having something like 1 gram per kilo of carbs per hour for the first few hours after exercise, if you've got really high workloads. And I'd do simple carbs for the first 1 to 2 hours before switching to a more nutritious type of high carb meal in general. The reason why I did add that caveat is because what if that came out as like the equivalent of like 3 grams per kilo of carbs per day and you were only aiming for 3 for the entire day and you've just like had that all in like a few hours or something like that. So like you would obviously have to tailor this based on your situation.
I like the number 1 gram. I think that is easy to remember. It's easy to implement. Most of the time that works pretty well. And whether it can be that combination of fast digesting carbs and potentially from a meal as well, that works pretty well. In terms of protein then, we talk about protein for muscle repair. So another really important aspect of refueling is supporting that muscle repair as quickly as possible to support the muscle protein synthesis, which speeds up recovery and adaptation from both sessions. Here I like to go for around 0.5 gram per kilo body weight within those first 3 to 5 hours is normally a pretty good snack, a pretty good guide, or having something like a snack with 20 to 30 grams of protein afterwards.
Absolutely. And people can debate how much this matters. I still do lean in favor of it actually mattering a little bit. It matters far less than total intake, but it still does matter a little bit, is my interpretation of the research. And I've read a lot of research as well. But another stance that I have seen from people who are even talking about it through the lens of this not necessarily mattering heaps is people have made the point being like, well, let's say you're aiming for enough total protein intake and you didn't do this. How are you going to hit that? Like if you're aiming for like 1.6 grams per kilo plus, do the maths on that in your head if you want, and you weren't eating before or after your sessions and you train twice in a day, when are you getting all that in? So it makes sense even if you're just caring about total intake to do this as well, just from a logistics standpoint.
I guess when we talk about we've got rapid repletion of glycogen, supporting muscle repair. The last R we like to talk about is replenishing fluid. So hydration is often overlooked, and in double training days, it's even potentially more important. So if you start that second session already dehydrated, it's so likely that performance is going to drop. So making sure that you drink regularly, that makes a lot of sense, replacing around 150% of fluid loss in those hours after training.
And if it's a really tight turnaround, so like let's say like 4 hours or something like that, I'd even consider adding electrolytes to this, even just because it's as simple as like if you, and this has been done in research, if you charted how much water or fluid people are absorbing per hour, and one version has just straight water and the other version has water plus sodium, the one that has water plus sodium typically absorbs a little bit more of that water, which would obviously matter a little bit more for this. I think all athletes should just be well hydrated all the time where possible, but even in elite sports, a lot of sports dietitians do this like hydration testing, and if they say they're going to do it every week, but if they do a surprise one on the first one, so many athletes show up to the session dehydrated. If they come to next week, everyone's hydrated. So like it is just a good friendly reminder.
Timing of food, it becomes important. We've just mentioned a few things that we think are important to get in around a session, as well as making sure that you reach total energy protein requirements. That can be hard. So I do like to say, ideally getting 3 balanced meals plus snacks, but then that additional carb-rich pre-workout is important. And ideally what to get in, along with those extra carb snacks if possible afterwards too.
And close to training, like you want it to be easy to digest, so you want low fiber, low fat. Noting that this is a bit individual and some people could tolerate a bit more of those things, some people could tolerate a little bit less of that. The goal is just to like have it so that you're feeling good. It doesn't feel like it's sitting super heavy in your stomach or anything like that. We're speaking about protein around sessions. There is an argument that you could benefit from having some level of protein before, particularly the further, like if it's like 2 hours before the session or whatever. The closer it gets to the session, the less likely I would recommend that. And one downside of this, particularly if you're doing it twice in a day where you're going like simpler carbs, easy to digest both before and after, is you start missing certain stuff. And I think the next name of the game is, how do I make up for the rest of that stuff throughout the rest of the day? How do I get more micronutrients in? How do I get more like fruits and vegetables just in general? How do I get more fiber alongside that, more whole grain options? How do I get more healthy fats, so on and so forth? So suddenly now the timing even matters for your meals that are like not around your sessions too.
Especially when, like we said, lower fiber often means you need to eat a lot of that fiber at main meals, more so than at other times of the day, along with just tacking on there as well iron-rich food sources, those protein sources, and maybe calcium and dairy as well, which can come in as a nice after-training snack too.
Absolutely. And you can see why, I don't know about you, but I get more excited about like people who are training twice a day, because I'm like, there's so much more, like so many more things still matter. I'm not saying like when you train once a day, stuff still matters, but suddenly you just have to be a bit more particular about this stuff if you want to optimize it.
We're going to run through something now, whether we think it's important to do any sort of periodized intake. So what that refers to is periodizing intake with training phases to optimize outcomes like your fat metabolism, glycogen storage, potentially gut function, and often it moves beyond generic recovery advice, which we've just spoken about. So carbohydrates after and around training. One of those is training high and sleeping low. Aidan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so what we've spoken about is like the traditional gold standard way, but the train high, sleep low kind of approach is the idea of, if you're training twice a day, you could do some sessions in a high carb state, some sessions in a low carb state. And the training high is like hypothetically you did a session in the afternoon that is ideally an intense session and you've had heaps of carbs coming into it. Then after that session, you have almost no carbs and you go to sleep, so you're sleeping low, so to speak. And then you do a fasted or a low carb session in the morning the next day, which ideally is a lower intensity effort. And the reason why they would structure it that way is, one, getting those adaptations you spoke about in terms of like fat metabolism, mitochondrial adaptations. There's benefits to being in a low carb state. And even just elaborating on that, like high carb tends to outperform low carb a little bit in the research, but not as much as you would possibly expect. And I would actually even make an argument not as much as high carb outperforms moderate carb. And that's partly because there are some adaptations that occur in a low carb state. Researchers have obviously looked into like, can we get the best of both worlds? One thing that doesn't seem to work is just going low carb and then having heaps of carbs before a race and during a race. People don't tolerate the carbs very well. So the logic is to get to a bit of both. Why they would do it low intensity, high intensity is, let's say you're a runner and you're doing intervals. If you do it in a low carb state, you might not hit the same paces, particularly later in the session. You get less of a stimulus for adaptation. But if you're doing a zone 2 run, you are going to hit those paces regardless. So doing it this way kind of allows you to always hit the intensity you're meant to be hitting, but you could potentially be getting some more adaptations in the low carb sessions, which is the logic that they're getting at with this.
I haven't read too many studies. I had a look at a few sort of acute trials which did show that the next morning there is an upregulation of lipid oxidation markers versus someone who has had that fed recovery state, but not necessarily changes in mitochondrial function, which that's an interesting one by Lane et al. I'm sure there's other ones out there. Any that you wanted to mention specifically?
So the first thing I did want to mention is, and we've spoken off air about our like preparation process for podcasts and stuff like that. And we obviously put a lot of work into this. I've said off air just before that like one of the last things I do is go to AI. I don't go to AI first, but I don't want to miss it completely because there is value in it. And the reason why I don't want to go to it first is because sometimes it would make me personally just like less lazy. It would make me more lazy with like checking other stuff. But then secondly, it can kind of lead you in odd directions. And something I've noticed more and more over the last like few months is, if I ask the same question of AI, it gives me different answers on different days, even if I use the same model, and very different. So like, I'll use this example before I talk about this, but like I was looking at like endo and creatine, and one day it was just kind of like, yeah, it makes sense for women with endo to like not have creatine. And then the next day, same kind of question, it was just like, the risk's pretty low. And I was like, geez, if I was like...
Make up your mind.
Yeah, if I was a woman with endo, I would be very concerned by that. But what I was going to get at with this is I did the train high, sleep low stuff, and there are times I've put it in and it has been like No, it's not beneficial. Like it's like the research shows that it doesn't matter. And then other times it's been like, absolutely matters. It's something that improves performance for sure. A lot of the elite athletes are doing it. They're doing this concept of fueling for the work required, which is like a bit more of a nuanced way of doing this, so on and so forth. But looking at research, this is 2021 that I was looking at, but like obviously there's a bit more research now, but there was a meta-analysis looking at 9 studies on the topic that found no improvement in performance. That is the metric I care about. That is the outcome that I care about. That therefore means at best, if there is an improvement, it can't be a large improvement because it would be showing up there. At worst, it can't be making people worse. So in terms of where I kind of stand, I do actually see potential for it. I wouldn't rule it out for people. And particularly if somebody like is enjoying it and stuff like that and say they've personally found benefit for it, I think go for it, right? I do also stand by my at worst kind of statement of there are many people who just like have a super early morning session that is like a low intensity thing and they don't like eating before it. And I'm like, all the power to you. This shows you that you don't need to. Like it's fine. And I think you can pick and choose. I do still stand by if you're doing intense sessions, you should probably carb up before that, whether it's the day before, the morning of, whatever. I've got one more thing or 2 more pieces of nuance I'll go 3. So 1, it could be a more complex way of achieving the same outcomes. It definitely makes easy sessions feel harder than they need to be. This is something that absolutely shows up in the research, and I think it massively slides under the radar. There are people who are doing these like zone 2 runs and they feel like trash doing it, but they're hitting the pace, but it's like, well, this should be easy. Like it's called an easy session. So it makes things harder than it needs to be. And there is also a little bit of concern about REDs. I don't know if had you?
Not necessarily, no.
I don't know where I fully stand on this because I think this can be misled by the fact that people with lower carbohydrate intake might have lower calories as well. But like the current consensus does seem to support the fact that there is research showing that carbohydrates specifically can be protective against some issues that are associated with REDs. So therefore, more so working with a female athlete population, particularly if they are at risk of underfueling, I am a bit cautious of this idea of me just saying, oh, it's totally fine, just go for it. Like if you want to do a faster run, go for it. When there is like, there should be a little bit of caution applied there as well. But if REDs wasn't a factor for you, and just confirming relative energy deficiency, like in sports is what that stands for. If that wasn't a factor for you, then I would stand by you could also make a case that this approach isn't worse. So although everything we've spoken about has been like gold standard, so to speak, like if you did lower intensity sessions in a lower carb state, that could also be fine.
And bringing it right back down to total energy and nutrition intake across the day is most important. If you're struggling to get that, if you're not refueling after sessions, potentially this isn't for you either as well. Any other thoughts? I have another thought in terms of generally fueling for double training days. It does take a bit of preparation and planning because it's a lot of food. It's a lot of thoughts about what you're having prior, during, after, and between sessions. So if possible, getting some advice and input is always positive, I think.
Absolutely. And like taking everything we spoke about with the train high, sleep low stuff out of it, I do think this can be one of the simplest ways to improve performance. Like there's so many athletes I speak to and stuff like that. When they start implementing this, their second session of the day or whatever is so much better. And their general just like health and energy levels and everything like that. Because we haven't even spoken about that, but like refueling after that first session makes you feel better throughout the day. If you train twice a day, you probably potentially also work a job as well in the middle of the day, and you probably feel way better with this as well.
Anything else you wanted to add?
We'll wrap up there. So this is episode 252 of the Ideal Nutrition Podcast, where we talked about nutrition for double training days. As always, if you have not left a rating and review, we would massively appreciate it.